Hey everyone, thanks for joining me. Hello, my name is Steve. You can find me on Instagram at FigureItAudi for little project updates in between these major videos that I add to the channel. And today we're going to be doing a ton of work. So we're going to do the full timing job on the 4.2 here. We're going to do all the subframe upgrades. We're going to finish reattaching the trans after a clutch job to the engine, mount all this together. We're going to do our slave cylinder upgrades. We'll hopefully get to that rear brake line fix. We'll see how things go. And really by the end of the episode, I want the car to be fully reassembled pretty much on its wheels again. Also, quick reminder that I usually forget about completely. If you see me using a certain type of tool for this project or consumable material, or even if it's just the parts themselves, look into the description of the video. I always do a full list of project materials and parts so you can source them yourself, usually on Amazon, or at least reference a part number of what I'm putting onto the car. Let's start off with a little bit of fun business here. The subframe looks amazing. So Custom Powder Solutions took care of this for me, and basically it was a three-stage process. First, what they did was they laser stripped it. So typically when you go to a shop, they will sandblast something for you, and sandblasting actually does do a pretty good job. But the new hotness is laser stripping. So it kind of looks like this. You've probably seen it online before. There's a laser that's a few inches wide. And what's really cool is they can adjust the depth of the laser too. So it can cut really deep, or it can take off just a minuscule top layer. And in my case, they did a fantastic job stripping out all the rust that we were seeing around the mount pockets and then down inside of the frame too. Like, I know black on light like this is a little hard to see, but like there is not an ounce of rust on this thing. And there were no cracks either. I just wanted to mention that because in very few cases, I have seen reports of subframes being cracked along certain edges, but I can tell you that I gave it a good inspection inside of the control arm pockets, inside of the cups where they are welded to the rest of the frame, along all the seams. This thing was in really great shape. However, this was not just stripped and then powder coated. This was actually zinc coated first. So once it was down to fresh bare metal, there was actually it sort of looks like a gray layer that's also applied very much like a powder coat of zinc. So that is your rust protection layer, which means that the subframe is going to last so long, even longer than what you would normally see out of a powder coated frame. But then it did receive 2 full coats of carbon black powder coating. So we need to put some bushings into the subframe now, and I went with these. I'm showing them to you on screen because the real ones are in my freezer right now. They are essentially an interference fit, meaning if I were to try to put those in the subframe right now, and this has nothing to do with the fact that it was powder coated and some thickness was added there, they wouldn't just like drop right in. So I've had to shrink them with, coldness in the freezer, and I'll take my torch and lightly apply it to the pockets where they're going to drop into, and then I might need to gently knock them into place.
You're a dumbass.
I'll just say there aren't a ton of options for fresh subframe bushings. You can use the OEM ones, and if you have the OEM press-in tool, sure, go for it. But like I said last episode, those are a little hard to come by and extremely expensive, and just kind of not worth it in my opinion. I specifically wanted to go for these 034 billet ones because one, somehow they don't add NVH, which seems kind of weird because they're literally solid metal, but apparently subframe mounts don't contribute to NVH, so that's cool. But also they're 2-piece, which means I get to just drop them into the bottom and the top. There's no pressing at all required here.
Yeah, jackass.
Otherwise, your options for bushings are actually kind of limited. There's also the Verkline mounts that make a really nice 2-piece poly set that I bet are pretty good, but they're just a little expensive. And considering the 034 ones also come with the 4 long stretch bolts that you're going to need to buy anyways to attach the subframe to the bottom of the chassis again, it's actually a pretty good value buy. I also need to give a huge shout out to all of you who responded to my plea for help on Instagram, and especially Augustin, who eventually helped get these 034 mounts for me and send them up to Canada. I'll just say for a second here, it's tough to get certain things from 034 by policy that it seems that they apply out to other stores like FCP and ECS Tuning. They actually don't allow their stuff to be sold to Canada. So if I were to go onto ECS's website, put a whole bunch of 034 Motorsport things in my cart, it actually wouldn't let me check out at all. Now for FCP Euro, they do allow you to send it to Canada, which is amazing. That's typically where I get my 034 stuff from. But then once in a while, they actually don't have all the catalog items and can't add them. And that was the case here. So that's why I went onto Instagram, threw out that story and said, please, will someone get this shipment for me and forward it up to Canada? So again, thank you everyone who responded to that. If it's not for you, I couldn't do things like this. So thank you. All right, I'm going to go grab a few of those top mounts from the freezer, get my torch out, and let's see how this goes. Boom. And Okay. No, that's not gonna do it. Okay, here's the deal. I do have the front bottoms in, and I used my press. Now, of course, you're gonna ask, why were you trying to work on the ground before and just not use your press in the first place? Well, it's because there's actually no good angle to work from at all when it comes to the top fronts. So what I mean by that is when you put this into the press, you see sort of like the downward sloping angle on the front here, plus the little crossbars at the bottom that hold the lower control arm. They very much get in the way of being able to center and level the top part of the front mounts here, which makes it really difficult to press something in straight. I couldn't even press it in with the press. So what I've done is put the bottom ones in because just by chance, they sort of help level it up on two 2x4s. And I'm gonna give this another shot here. I think I can get it in straight this time. Also, I'm not at all embarrassed that this is giving me a little bit of trouble even with the press. I don't have a huge like press kit, meaning I don't have like big cups or different press plates of different sizes to help sort of guide this in. If you've worked on a press before, you'll know that it's just like, it's more art than science to try to rig up something to give the best coverage you need and the right pressure at the right angle to make sure something goes in. It just takes a little bit of work. I was a very silly boy this afternoon. I just wasted a couple hours trying to press those tops in. So even though the bottoms on the front could press in actually quite easily with essentially like no real preparation, the tops like would not go. So I stopped and checked out 034's website and realized that they said right there that although their inserts are machined to a very tight tolerance, the subframes from the factory tend to be kind of all over the place. So I measured, and that is exactly correct. So the inside diameter of the 034 inserts are about 71 millimeters, and the cups that they're getting pressed into are like 69.5. So yeah, no, there's like 1.5 mil there of interference that is not going to go away just with different temperature materials there. And they say that you are supposed to take like a carbide bit or a sanding wheel and actually remove a little bit of material, which is fine. I still want to make sure that I am extremely careful because I want to make sure that the mounts are like stuck in there right where they need to be and they're not flopping around at all. So I will now very carefully remove some material and get these tops pressed in. Boom, got one in, pressed in on the top here. Not too bad, takes a lot of patience. So essentially I'm using my digital caliper, constantly measuring the inside dimensions, and using my Milwaukee rotary tool. I've got my 1/8 inch shank little grinder disc on here, and I'm just slowly taking off layers and layers. What I found is once I got down to around 1/2 to 3/4 of a mil, so I'm talking about inside dimensions of maybe like 70.25 millimeters. That was enough with a little bit of heat and then cooling on the billet insert to be able to actually successfully be pressed in. So short break for an iced coffee and a homemade muffin, and then we're gonna go do 5 more of those things. Full disclosure, that rotary tool was taking a little bit too long for my liking, so I switched to my die grinder. I'm just using a pretty standard bit on here. It's a double cut carbide burr. There we go, now it's tracking. And this makes short work of the subframe because ultimately it's still taking, I don't know, about 20 minutes a hole here. So might as well eat out some of that metal, and then I just smooth it up at the end. I also need to shout out to my own video that I did on this air compressor filtration system because I'm using my oiled source because I'm using an air tool now. So that's really cool to just make use of all the hard work that I did here before. If you want to learn more about how I set this up and why, check out this video up here, top right corner. Ta-da, all done, and not without its hardships. I'm going to talk about that for sure in a second because I have some complaints, but at least aesthetically speaking, I love how this turned out, and I really can't wait to get this on the road and see how it feels too. In part, I will openly say my gripe here is with 034 Motorsport. I totally understand that they did some measurements and decided to make a 71 mil insert and that they knew that the OE tolerances were kind of all over the place. But in my measurements, and who knows if my subframe is a reflection of all the average ones out there, they were all basically in that like sort of mid 69 mil territory. And I'd like to think that if they know that every owner is going to have to remove some material from inside of those pockets, that they would do some averaging and try to figure out, like what's close to OE, because 1.5 mil is no joke. And a subframe is an extremely awkward and heavy object to work around with a press. Like, hurt my arm, got bruises all over the place, dropped a bunch of stuff. Like, it was not a fun process. So even if the diameter of the 034 inserts were like 70 mil, that would have saved a lot of time. I would strongly recommend to you, if you're gonna go to a solid insert like I just did, do not attempt it if you do not have a press available to you, because you absolutely will need one. And just assume that you're gonna need like a die grinder, like a 1/4-inch die grinder and some bits to work your way through. You can do it with the sanding wheel. I did my first couple like that, but they took way too long, and you just don't want to get into that. So be prepared. Timing time, and I've eaten my vegetables first, and I've done my prep on my timing covers to make sure that I get a good seal later. So let me show you what I and you will have to do. It's not a fun or quick job, but it's important that you clean up your timing covers, most notably the little channel that you're going to be putting silicone into. That's what that's for. You need about 1 millimeter or 2 thickness of silicone sealant on here, as per Audi's manual, and it does squish over the side. It's very common that you'll see, you know, that black silicone sneaking out from all these different covers once it's actually assembled on the car. But without that channel free and clear, you'll just be globbing it on top of old silicone, and it's very likely you'll get a leak somewhere in the future. And of course, I've done the exact same thing on the back of the engine as well. So every flat sealing surface here, even some of the holes, got all that old junk out of there. There are no grooves on the engine, it's only on the timing cover side. But again, nice and clean, ready to go. Our second activity is rebuilding the adjusters. Now I have my kit from AM Tuned returned to me. This is essentially what you get: 2 remanufactured sprockets, plus a set of new O-rings, 2 washers, and some fresh springs. You know, we really are lucky to have companies like AM Tuned around to offer this type of service, because you definitely do not need to buy a full set of brand new adjusters like the entire units. Those are very expensive, and it's pointless because this is the only wear item that really happens. So quite simply what they do is leave the existing OE keyhole in like so. So you can see there's still like a quote unquote damaged one on the back of your new sprocket, but they take their CNC and then they machine in exactly the same spec of hole, just at a different rotation. So you're just going to assemble it a little bit different, but they're going to be brand new. So I'm going to hit you with the time lapse as I assemble mine. Truly, I'm just following Alex's own video on how to do this on YouTube, since this is my first time as well. But I'll come back and talk about the locked versus unlocked position, because it's really important you know what's going on before you install these onto the car. Done. That was actually a very, very easy process. You will notice in the newer kits compared to Alex's video that the washers are a little different. Now they're like a solid, I don't think they're thicker, but according to Alex, they're actually a little bit stronger. So don't be surprised if there's a little bit of a difference between what you see in the video versus what you actually receive. Now here is the important part, and really the keynote is these adjusters must be locked before you put them onto the car. If they are not, and you tighten everything down, the cam is actually already going to be off time, the intake cam. It's going to be moving around and not actually in time with the exhaust cam beside it. So you have to lock them into place, and that's a very simple process. I've already done it on the bottom one. Really, it's just put little screwdrivers in from the front face like this and just turn it clockwise. So you can see that if I turn it right now, other than that tiny little clicky movement of the pin inside of the hole already that it's in, you know, it's not moving. Here's one that I have not done yet. So keep in mind that when we installed this, the sprocket has to, I think it's down here actually, it's over the hole where the pin is sitting is actually here, and the hole that it falls down into is over here. So all we're doing is sliding it up and to the right so that the pin falls down into that hole. So the step is as simple as turned. That was it. Now it's locked into place. Put my things back in. Cannot turn it. So these are ready for installation. And just like that, it's the evening now. You can see the shadows on my face. Here in Alberta, when we get to this time of year, it's now, I think, October 2nd today when I'm filming this. Sun's down at like 7:30 at night. So we lose a lot of daylight and you end up working outside in the dark pretty often. It's gonna get worse though when the snow hits. Doesn't matter, let's do the timing now. And you know what, I'm just gonna go slow and enjoy myself. I'm gonna throw it on time lapse so you can watch me work again. But I don't think there's a chance that I'm gonna be doing like another timing job to this level on a chain driven 4.2 in the near future. So I'm just gonna chill out and listen to some music and just have a good time. I'm also literally just following partial steps from Alex's video on YouTube, some of JHM's for cross-reference. So I know I'm gonna do it right, and I've got my factory manual in the background. I'm gonna nail every part of this, so I'm just gonna have some fun. You know what, that was a nice little working session last night. It's a bit of a process, took a little longer than I thought it would because you have to pay attention to some very small details. You just want to be really careful that the chain is riding right in the middle of all those guides. Make sure you're getting all of your torque specs correct and you got all those 90-degree turns. You saw me do the final torque on our exhaust sprockets and then the adjusters once I got a friend to come over and just help counter hold those cams for me. So we're done and it looks amazing. To point out the obvious, yes, of course, we have the two upgraded RS4 metal guides. And then really everything else is just fresh hardware. You probably will catch people reusing fasteners that are on the tensioner body here too, but you're definitely not supposed to. They are torque heeled as well, 90-degree turns. You can see that every single one of my screws has a little paint marker on there. Started at 12 o'clock, ended at 3 o'clock. I know this looks a little weird, but temporarily I've just put the old flywheel back on here. And I've learned since the first episode, I have a tool exactly for this express purpose of turning it over. Because I just want to see the chains go around and make sure that I'm not hearing any weird noises or feeling any binding. And this is going to be a little bit of a weird view for you, but suffice to say that on one end, it embeds itself within the teeth in the flywheel. And then I sort of stretch the bar over, and then I can grab it and just pull with one hand. Like so. Mission accomplished. So with the crank spun around a couple of times, we have the cams that are lined up with these slots that are dead straight to the head on both sides. And then using my little mirror and flashlight looking down into the crank web hole, it is exactly where it needs to be too. So we are good. Since everything checked out with the timing, I get to proceed. I'll pop on my rear solenoids and then move on to the timing covers. Now, you probably won't catch it in the time lapse, but since I am following the factory manual and it is very intense, there is a torque order for everything back there too. You don't just slam in the bolts all willy-nilly. There is obviously specific torques for the different sizes of screws, but then also there is an order. Typically what they want you to do on things like this, I find anyways, is move from the inside out. It's all about applying pressure evenly, slowly, to make sure that the faces that are machined together actually press really nicely and consistently together as they move out from the middle to the outside. Now, before I go ahead and just slap the RTV on everywhere and tighten everything down, a couple things to note. One, I'm using ultra black in part because I find that this is like a really great all-around RTV. It's a little bit flexible even when it's dry, really oil resistant, vibration resistant, perfect for conjoining metal parts like this with machined faces on it. But we got to talk about a couple things here. One is that it's worth noting in the manual here, this is actually a two-stage tightening process. So not only is there an order, but we're going 10 Newton meters and then 22 to finish off for the final torque. But also keep in mind, most RTVs will tell you on the back that you need to basically, like not final torque everything down, let it dry a little bit, and then do your final torque. So what I'm gonna do is exactly that. I'm gonna put my silicone on here, do 10 Newton meters, wait about an hour, and then do my final torque to 22. It's kind of funny because a lot of the times when you look at the back of these engines, you see just oodles of RTV squished out everywhere. And in part, I think that's because people are not very patient, and also because they put way too much on typically. But if you think about it, like this little groove is all there really is to truly seal the surfaces together. And if you immediately just smash it down full torque, yeah, like all of it's gonna squish out. You're gonna have very little of it actually doing the sealing. So I don't know, that's just my approach. I'll do the upper timing covers in a second. Literally not even going to talk about those. It's more or less the same process, so who cares? I just wanted to point out, some of the care that I'm trying to take here on this project. I went and found new O-rings for both of the solenoids in the back that go into the mechanical cam adjusters. Just want to make sure that, if there's anything that could leak, I'm taking care of it. Speaking of not leaking, I just want to go back and talk about my sealant for a second, but more so the tool that you just saw me use. This is my brand new Valco Cincinnati tube gripper. It's actually really nice. I don't know if you've ever been in the position where you have to put out, quite a bit of sealant. Not that this project is really that, but you're almost against the clock and it like hurts your hands and you're squeezing on the tube trying to roll it up like toothpaste or something like that. And, it's just not a comfortable experience. This makes it so much faster, and it's so easy to control the pressure on it, so you can actually get a bead that's the consistent thickness all the way down. I just did that whole rear timing cover in like, I don't know, less than a minute. It was super fast and very comfortable. Time for the rear main. And I wanted to share this with you, not because the procedure is interesting or even tricky. It's just, over time I've done a handful of these now. And once in a while, the manual might say to like coat the seal in something or the outer face of the crank. But more often than not, it actually just goes in dry, which is totally fine. Also, in an old video on the S4, I used a set of factory tools to press the front seal of the same engine on. But you know what? I'm going old school this time because you usually get a little bushing just like this that is already pre-sized for your specific car. And it works really, really well, actually. So let's do it together. Maybe if I just press the seal itself. Oh, scary. There we go. Cool. Ow, hit my thumb. Okay, now that it's straight, I'll keep going. Just wanted to make sure that it was walking onto the crank flat. And now we've arrived at flywheel and clutch time. So brand new OE clutch, and I'm keeping the existing flywheel. And I can already hear you guys going, oh my God, Steve, why are you doing this to yourself? How come you're not upgrading to a lightweight aluminum flywheel? And why are you just going to an OEM clutch? Well, here's why. When it comes to the clutch, did you know that the S4 and the RS4 share these exact same OE luck components? And that car has almost 100 more horsepower. So my mod is stage 1, even if it goes all the way to stage 3, it's going to be able to do what it needs to do on this clutch, no problem. Also, the value cannot be beaten. So for under $300 US, you get the whole kit, including a new throwout bearing for the transmission, a little bit of spline grease, and then a new needle bearing that needs to go into the middle of the flywheel. And because we're staying OE with the clutch setup, and because we've already looked at this last episode, no cracks, good wear, it's got lots of life left in this flywheel here. It doesn't matter if it's just a little bit heavier. I have no complaints about how quickly revving the engine is right now. I don't need a lighter flywheel, so I am totally happy sticking with this right now. So I've got one little quick piece of work here. I need to press out that bearing and press the new one in, and then we can mount all of this up. Proof, new in, old out. And I actually wish that when you bought the clutch kit that it would come with some fresh hardware. It's just 6 of those little bolts, but they are torque to yield, as are the bolts that need to go and hold the flywheel to the crank. FYI, there is a nice little package here that you can buy. I got mine from ECS Tuning. It's from Saks directly, and it comes with 8 in a kit. It saves you a little bit money to buy it in this little package here, and you can obviously see the part number. Everything is torqued down, plus it's 90 degrees, and let's share this special moment of life, pulling out the alignment plug from a clutch set. Hopefully we get that nice pop. Here we go. Ah, it was okay, it was okay. And now it's time to address the final part of the clutch kit, which is actually the throwout bearing inside of the transmission here. I'm gonna do it with you just because this is not really something people talk about very often, but it's not a particularly hard job either. It's just sort of maybe not well documented, or people assume that it's so simple that it doesn't really require any kind of like DIY information, which is kind of true, because really it's just removing this giant T45 Torx bolt and a little retaining clip, at which point we should be able to pop off the fork entirely, and this should just pop out with these 2 little retaining clips right here. Should be able to pinch and push. Boop. And the new one I'll go get and we'll pop it right back in. Off camera, I just did a couple of things. I cleaned up the lever with some brake clean just to get some of that old clutch dust off of there. And then it also says to put a little copper paste up in the hole that receives the plunger end of the slave cylinder. And I took it upon myself just to put a little bit down here too, where it pivots against the housing itself too. I've never seen a metal on metal connection that couldn't use a little bit of lube, so I figured why not. And we have one more step here before we install everything. We have our little packet of spline grease that comes with the kit, which of course I appreciate very much, because it would be annoying to buy a whole bunch of this stuff for a job that you're going to do a handful of times in life, and certainly not need a giant container for. I did wipe out the splines a little bit. You're not supposed to like clean them like crazy. You just get some of the old gunk off of there. And I'm trying to do this in a camera friendly way. There we go. Get that out here. There we go. I'm gonna go ahead and just spread the love a bit. And again, although it doesn't call it out specifically, I'm just going to use the last little bit in here. I'm going to put a bit on the shaft that the throwout bearing slides on. The inside of the throwout bearing is like a plastic that is meant to ride on here. But I want to make sure that it's got a little something to slide against too. There we go. And now all we have to do is remount everything. So we'll go like so. There's 2 like little high rounded points here. Those go left to right. That's it, she's in. And I'll put this on here. The manual does call for a little bit of Loctite. Check. Put this back in here. And just make sure that's seated exactly where it used to be, so everything is copacetic. We need 24 Newton meters even, no stretching. And that is it. Yeah, I jumped ahead a little bit. After I finished up with the trans there, I rebuilt the block and put the trans on. It just so happens that when the engine is sitting on a tire, it's pretty much the perfect height to mate up the trans when the trans is sitting on like an average sort of like furniture dolly. So I did that by myself, not too much of a trouble. And in the meantime, I continued my refreshing of stuff. So although I don't have a pitcher, because I'd have to fish it out of the garbage, we've got fresh seals on the main connection points where the water pipe goes into the back of both of the heads. And we've got 2 fresh crush washers on the high pressure line going into the power steering pump. Fresh seals on the outside of the head for both of the oil solenoids. And I went ahead and bought, for no real good reason, another one of these OEM screws just to make the back of the engine look real nice. Also, before I put the trans in place, and this goes for practically every fastener on the block here that I've touched, is with my tap and die, I chased down the threads on the inside of every hole, and I took every fastener and I ran my die down it. So basically every single time a fastener went in, it was buttery smooth. It also really helps with the final torque specs. Like if it's dirty or oily, or there's basically anything that shouldn't be there on the threads, you're actually not applying the final torque that you really need to be. So it helps when everything is really clean. We're almost at the point where everything is going to go back in, but while we still have access, because we're going to need to bleed the brakes later, we need to address that mangled fitting that I showed you on the end of last episode with the brake line where it just rounded off the flare fitting on top, and I need to do something about it. Well, I have a fantastic solution. Just like I said last episode, where there are great places throughout your city that will come to rescue you in a pinch, Edmonton Brake and Clutch came in clutch and built me a custom line that is going to save me so much time and money repairing that line professionally with perfect quality parts in the rear of the car there. So here's the thing. When I was doing my research about how to fix this, and I was fully ready to buy the flaring tools and the materials to do so, and you could still do that, I realized that European cars mostly use bubble fittings, not double flared fittings. I almost bought the tools for double flare, and that is kind of the more common one that you might find on like Amazon on your average store shelves, but Euros and especially the Audis use bubble flares. And your biggest challenge with trying to create a flare while the line is still on the car is that your odds of making a perfect flare are kind of low, to be honest. The area that I would be working on, especially back there near the gas tank, had essentially no room, and the tools are not small. It's not too hard to cut a line, but to wrap the flare fitting tool around it and then press the flare itself into shape, it's pretty tricky. And it's even if you got the right shape of the flare, if it's off-centered a little bit, it won't be received into the female end of the brake line very well, and you'll probably have a leak, and then you're screwed because then you got to cut it even further back, and then you have even less room, and sort of your problems domino. Now, the secret sauce of this solution is the fitting right on this end right here. This makes it so that I have to cut the line, but I do not need to manually create a flare fitting back there with any tools at all. Here is how this lovely solution is going to work. So downstream, we of course still have our StopTech brake line, which, like I said, is designed to accept a bubble flare, which is really important because it means on our custom line, we have to make sure that the bubble flare is on this end. So right here in this section, this is exactly what we have from the factory. We have a hard line coming in with a bubble flare, plus we have an M10 with a 1.0 thread pitch flare that is going to seal up nicely, right? Now, of course, we need to make it all the way over to a hard line. Now, this is just a hard line as an example, so pretend that it's cut like a raw end right here. Now, normally you would think to yourself, well, I need to get some tooling and create a bubble flare over here. Not the case here. So I will be able to cut it at an advantageous point. And the beauty of this is it's basically a compression fitting with a ferrule in it. So I will cut, slide this end over the line like so, and then I have this this ferrule which will fit down into here, and then I will simply with the line insert it all the way down into here. I'll fit it all together, and when I tighten it, it'll be compressed and I'll have myself a nice solid fitting. So off camera, I'm gonna go do a little strategic thinking, come up with a game plan. I have my new line cutter, which I'll use back there to cut the hard line on the car, somewhere where it's gonna be easy to patch in that custom line that I just showed you. And if need be, I also have a little brake line bender that I bought too. Keep in mind, these brake lines are 3/16 on these cars to each corner that go to the calipers. So if I need to put a little bit of a radius in that long silver part that I just showed you, I can do that so it kind of comes down into the rubber brake line like at a really nice angle. Quick check-in here because things are going really well, and if I don't stop now, I'll just do the whole job without talking to you. So given that I'm working in the back by the filler neck here, I did have to drop this plate down on the ground here, which typically just goes across and protects this whole area and actually supports this plastic spot as well. So extra removal, but it's all good. And you can see, this is not the funnest place to record in. What I've gone ahead and done is made my cut right here where it would typically bend downwards. And I'll just say that these lines are quite pliable. Obviously, you don't want to wrench on it too crazy because it can pinch, but they are malleable enough that you can very gently coax them, especially if you have like a round edge of something that you use to sort of like do the radiusing, so you're not just doing it with your finger, aka promoting a kink. You can actually change the direction like pretty easily. So note that the black stuff on the outside is not metal. This is actually just like a really tough plastic coating. So I went ahead and took my butane torch right here, one of these little guys. You can use it for cooking. And I just melted it off. And that was exactly the advice that I got from Edmonton Brake and Clutch anyways. The guy just said, hey, lightly heat up that outer coating. It'll just sort of melt away, then clean off the connection itself. So I use some acetone to clean up the exterior. And then just make sure that the edge is really, really clean. So you can kind of see in these pictures, I hope anyways, that I have deburred the inside and I've sanded down the outside just enough to make sure there's no lip on the outer edges and that the front face is also very flat as well. Now that I've cleaned up that exterior plastic surface, I can get my fitting on here. There you go. Perfect. Just as designed, because it can't when the plastic is still on there because it's made exactly for a 3/16 line. Anyways, I'm going to keep working here, and next time I come back, this will be done and looking great. And just like that, it's done. I know this doesn't look like a big reveal. It was actually a lot easier than I thought. Having a line made like this makes life pretty good. So quite simply, the hard line goes up here. I gave it a bit of a bend to the left. It actually goes behind sort of that part of the filler neck. And then you can't see it, but there's about a 180-degree loop back there, comes right down, straight into the hard line, which I put about, about 10-degree bend. So you can see it still comes out from exactly where it did before underneath the car and just comes up at a little bit steeper of an angle into my compression fitting, and Bob's your uncle. With everything looking so OEM back there, to the untrained eye, you might not even notice anything was changed, which is great. So I am going to leave the fender liner out for a second because after the next part that we have to install, I'll have to bleed the brakes. And not that I expect there to be any leaks out of these new fittings, but just visually kind of make me feel better if I can just see them while I'm doing that process. So let's move on to that final piece, which of course is our upgraded slave cylinder kit. This is what you get from AM Tuned when you get the full metal bodied cylinder plus the line. Just note that this little part right here comes in the Sachs kit with the slave cylinder in it, but you don't need it. So that's just a throwaway, don't get confused. Here is the part itself. It is technically just a factory part, and you could buy it individually if you really truly wanted to. However, the secret sauce of this kit is not only the line with some fittings that's going to make your life easy, but there's also one little AN fitting that you're going to need right here to connect it all together. I'll assemble the new kit in a second, but I just wanted to show side by side with the OE setup so you kind of understand like what you're keeping, what you're letting going, what the benefits are. So full plastic bodied here, which isn't a huge deal. This one is going to be a little bit more durable, but sort of like pedal feel wise, there's not going to be any real difference from the cylinder itself. Also, the total dimensions are exactly the same. So is the mounting point. So, you're not changing anything about the throw of the plunger against the lever inside of the transmission. All of that is the same. What's really different here is the upstream action. So coming out of the OE setup, we have this hard line that connects to your rubber line, and that's where the pedal feel difference is going to come from, moving to the stainless steel kit right here. The other mild benefit is that you simply have one line connected to your slave. So if you're going into the car for service, you don't have to fiddle around with all of this situation. Meaning in the back, inside of the cabin anyways, your clutch pedal and the master, you've got a hard line that runs up under the ECU box, roughly here. There's a grommet under the brake booster. And that's what pops out down way back up in here and then finally terminates where I have my little clip on the line right here. You're just simplifying everything from here onwards. Not a big reveal, simply the AN fitting is in place. Now, I know that flared fittings don't require sealant, but when it comes to things that hold back, a few thousand pounds of pressure, I, at times, like to use stuff like this. So a couple dots of this. This is the type of thing where I sealed my quick jack hydraulic lines with it, and it just holds things into place just a little bit better and helps seal things up. Outside of that, don't worry about the metal bracket that's on your OE slave. You can't reuse this simply because of the shape right here. It's just not going to work, but it's not going to matter anyways because let me show you the stainless line. The line is not attached to the slave, it's attached to the car. So I've got this torqued down. Yes, it's a little bit long. You are going to need to find a way to loop it to bring up some of the slack, but the 90-degree fitting here is going to be very handy for your approach on entry when the transmission is into place. But yes, there is a reason why this is on the car and not attached to the slave right now. So basically what I'm going to do is do a perfect installation on the transmission while it's out of the car. And then in the process of installing all of this, I'll give myself some working room such that I can attach the top line here really securely and nicely and give myself some room to do the bleeding when I do all the rest of the brakes. But I know that I'm really confident in how this was installed. Boop, it's in. Took like 1 second, zero struggle. Got the bolt torqued down to spec, which I'm sure absolutely nobody does when you're under the car. And we can move on to the subframe, which I've already sort of like soft mounted to the car. There's still about yay room between it and the chassis. And it's a bit of a struggle to do by yourself if you've ever done it before. Really, you're just connecting those two control arms, but it's a little tricky with the weight of the suspension and, you know, just wrestling with things. What I want to talk about, though, is the fact that just because you could get those 4 big bolts through the subframe and up into the chassis holes does not mean that your subframe is aligned. This is an extraordinary example right here. So here is my factory tool. I don't know, whatever, it's on the screen. I forget. And you can see that there are 3 alignment holes. If you've ever looked up from below the car, you may have noticed this bottom one in the front of the engine mount itself. And you probably didn't quite realize that it is one of 3 different alignment holes that all need to line up to make sure that, in part, your suspension alignment is correct, but also that just basically the chassis, the subframe, and the engine mount bracket is all where it's supposed to be. Now you just slide this tool through, and this is a great example of how things are not aligned. And just because the dowel made it through the 3 holes doesn't mean it's straight. In fact, if I were to go to under the car right now, you would see that the subframe is actually a little bit too far to the rear of the car. And that's the case on both sides. If it was aligned perfectly, oh God, I'd be able to pull this in and out with essentially zero effort. It would just slide right in. But obviously I can't, so I need to knock this subframe around and I'll show you what aligned actually looks like. After a little wacka wacka persuasion, you should be left with something that moves a little bit like this. It's gonna be squeaky though. There we go. Now pre-flight checks are complete. That means I just rigged up the O2 sensors to the back of the transmission with some loosely fitted zip ties so I don't have to fish them all through later. And then on the car itself, I went ahead and pre-mounted the ECU just because these connectors back in here are a little tricky to get to once the engine's in because they're kind of leaning over at weird angles. And I've got the harness kind of peeled back and away. And I'm trying to cheat in this particular case. I've got my axles preloaded in to the hubs. I'm going to slip the transmission in the middle because I think it's just kind of an annoying process to later on, you know, turn the wheels and try to jam an axle in with everything in place. We'll see if this works. I've been editing this video on the fly, so I know that at this point we're around the 41-minute mark. And I know that most of you are not subscribed, and of all of you who watch, you watch like 25% of these long videos. So I feel like we've had enough here for this episode. What I'll do is start up part 3 right now, and we'll start immediately with the installation of the engine. We'll get all our fluids going, we'll do all of our pre-start checks, and then by the end of next episode, we'll already be working on a couple of exterior and interior things, making this car look really, really good. And I'll leave you guys who made it this far into the video with a bit of a surprise. This car is going to be for sale. Yes, that's right. I've been doing all of this all along with a brand new car that's already sitting off to my shoulder here that you have not seen unless you're a channel member. And it means that the S4 has to go, which is why I've been putting in so much effort to try to do all the hardest things that nobody wants to do, and also to help the value of the car a little bit. So if you're interested, DM me. I'll be coming out with much more details at the top of next video, but hang tight. And finally, thank you so much for watching. It really does seem like you guys are enjoying sort of these longer videos that aren't about necessarily one thing. We're sort of just on a journey doing some work here. Maybe I'm teaching you a couple of new things. So that's cool. I've really enjoyed doing this series so far as well. So see you in the next one, my friends. Do the YouTube things in the meantime. Talk soon.